The sanctuary, Zoe Palmer pressed her forehead against the bus window, watching mountain pines blur into streaks of green and gray. 3 months ago, she'd been Dr. Palmer, rising star in observational astronomy at Grayson University. Now she was just Zoe, unemployed, nearly broke, and heading to a job that felt like career suicide. Last stop, Highland Ridge, the driver announced as the bus wheezed to a halt at a weathered wooden shelter. Next bus comes through on Thursday. Zoe gathered her 2 suitcases, all that remained after selling most of her possessions to cover rent, and stepped into the crisp mountain air. The directions she'd received were minimal. Follow the gravel road up the mountain for 1 mile until reaching the iron gates. Good luck up there, the driver said, eyeing her city shoes and light jacket. Storm's coming in tonight. As the bus pulled away, Zoe felt a flutter of panic. Was this a mistake? The job posting had been vague. Caretaker needed for private astronomical facility, housing provided, experience with telescopic equipment preferred. The salary was modest but included accommodation, and beggars couldn't be choosers when university budget cuts eliminated entire departments. The walk took nearly an hour, her suitcases growing heavier with each step. Finally, she reached a set of imposing iron gates with an intercom system that looked at least a decade out of date. She pressed the button, hearing static crackle through the speaker. "Hello? I'm Zoe Palmer, the new caretaker." Silence, then a mechanical hum as the gates slowly opened. Beyond them, the road continued upward through dense forest, before opening to reveal what could only be described as a modernist's dream gone slightly to seed. Stargazer's Haven sprawled across the mountaintop, a series of sleek buildings with glass walls and angular metal roofing. At its center rose a dome, housing what she assumed was the main telescope. Once it must have been breathtaking. Now windows were clouded with dust. Metal showed traces of rust, and the grounds had surrendered to wilderness. As Zoe approached the main entrance, the door swung open before she could knock. A man stood in the shadows, tall with dark hair that looked like it hadn't seen scissors in months and the kind of beard that suggested indifference rather than style. His clothes were expensive but rumpled, as if he'd slept in them. "You're late," he said flatly. Zoe straightened her spine. "The bus schedule isn't exactly frequent. I came as soon as I could." He regarded her with cool assessment, his eyes the color of storm clouds. "You're younger than I expected." "And you're ruder than I expected," she replied before she could stop herself. "Are you Mr. Reed?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Just Reed. Or Archer if you must." "No one calls me Mr. Anything, of course." Archer Reed, the wonderkind who'd built quantum algorithms in his dorm room, turned them into a tech empire by 25, then pivoted to private space exploration, before disappearing from public view 3 years ago. The rumors ranged from nervous breakdown to secret government work, but the truth was evidently more prosaic. He was hiding in a mountain observatory, looking like a castaway from a luxury yacht. "Your resume said you have experience with Newtonian reflectors and adaptive optics," he continued. "Was that a lie?" "I have a doctorate in observational astronomy from Stanford and 5 years' experience with the Grayson University Observatory," Zoe replied. "So no, not a lie. I've worked with everything from backyard telescopes to the 30-meter array in Hawaii." He seemed unimpressed. "The main scope hasn't worked properly in 18 months. 3 technicians have tried to fix it. If you can get it operational, you can stay. If not, the position won't be necessary." "That's not what the job description—" "The description changed," he interrupted. "Your quarters are in the East Wing. Kitchen stocked. Don't go into the West Building without permission. You have 3 days to fix the telescope." Before Zoe could respond, he disappeared down a corridor, leaving her standing alone in the echoing entryway. Her assigned quarters were surprisingly comfortable, a small apartment with basic furnishings, clean if somewhat dusty. After unpacking, she explored the main observatory building, finding it eerily empty. Equipment worth millions sat neglected, some still in original packaging. What had happened here? Clearly, money wasn't the issue. As darkness fell, Zoe ventured to the telescope dome. The facility's centerpiece was a custom-built reflector with a primary mirror that made her catch her breath. At least 2 meters in diameter, with what appeared to be experimental adaptive optics. She ran her hands along the control panel, feeling a familiar surge of excitement despite her circumstances. This instrument could see to the edge of the observable universe, yet it sat unused. What a waste. Examining the mechanism, She quickly identified the problem. The primary mirror alignment system had been incorrectly calibrated, and the tracking software was running an outdated algorithm, simple fixes for someone who knew what they were looking at. Hours passed as she lost herself in the work, the familiar rhythm of calibration and programming washing away her anxiety. Outside, the promised storm arrived, rain pattering against the dome as she made final adjustments. "What are you doing?" Zoe startled, nearly dropping her tablet. Archer stood in the doorway, watching her with narrowed eyes. "Fixing your telescope," she replied. "The primary mirror alignment was off by 3 microns, and your tracking software wasn't compensating for atmospheric distortion correctly." "That's not possible. My engineers said the issue was with the optical coating degradation." Zoe shrugged. "They were wrong. Look for yourself." She activated the system and the massive telescope hummed to life, the dome splitting open to reveal a sky washed clean by the passing storm. Stars blazed with impossible clarity, seeming close enough to touch. "There," Zoe said, pointing to a faint smudge of light at the edge of the viewfinder. "Messier 87. The supermassive black hole at its center is currently flaring. We're seeing light from an event that happened 55 million years ago." Archer approached slowly, as if drawn against his will. When he looked through the eyepiece, his breath caught audibly. "It's beautiful," he murmured, the hardness in his voice momentarily softened. "Yes," Zoe agreed. "It is." They stood side by side in the darkness, two strangers connected by nothing except the ancient light of distant stars. Yet in that moment something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared wonder. "There's a rare planetary transit occurring tomorrow night," Zoe said carefully, "the kind of event that happens once in a decade. This telescope could capture it perfectly." Archer was silent so long she thought he might not respond. Finally he nodded. "Show me." Zoe smiled for the first time since arriving. Perhaps this strange sanctuary among the stars wasn't a career dead end after all. Perhaps, like the telescope itself, it simply needed someone who understood its potential. As they continued observing the night sky, neither spoke of the arrangement's temporary nature. For now, it was enough to stand in the presence of infinity, their personal troubles momentarily diminished by the vast perspective only starlight can provide. The awakening 2 weeks into her stay at Stargazer's Haven, Zoe had established a rhythm. Days were spent maintaining and upgrading the observatory's equipment. Nights were dedicated to her own research, the controversial work on quantum-entangled stellar phenomena that her university had deemed too theoretical to fund. The observatory was coming back to life under her care. Dust covers disappeared. Lenses gleamed and computers hummed with purpose rather than neglect. Archer remained distant but no longer openly hostile, occasionally joining her during evening observations before disappearing back to whatever occupied him in the Forbidden West building. Tonight, Zoe monitored a distant pulsar, documenting its radiation patterns while a mountain storm gathered strength outside. The wind howled through the pines, rattling the dome's aging seals. "You should secure the equipment." Archer's voice came from the doorway. "This storm's worse than predicted." Zoe glanced at her monitors. "Just give me 5 more minutes. This pulsar's rotation is showing anomalies that could support my theory about—" A thunderous crack interrupted her, followed by the groan of metal. They both looked up as rain suddenly poured through a tear in the dome's protective covering. "The mounting bolts must have weakened over time," Archer said, already moving. "Help me close the shield before water damages the primary mirror." They worked frantically, Archer operating the emergency closure mechanism while Zoe covered sensitive equipment with protective tarps. When the automatic system jammed halfway, they were forced to manually crank the heavy dome closed against the howling wind. "The access doors blocked by debris," Archer reported after checking their exit. "We're stuck here until maintenance can clear it in the morning." Zoe sank onto an observation bench, suddenly exhausted and dripping wet. "At least we saved the telescope." Archer nodded, then disappeared into a small utility closet, returning with emergency blankets and, surprisingly, a bottle of whiskey. "Standard emergency supplies," he explained, seeing her raised eyebrow. "Astronomy has a long tradition of night watches and strong spirits." As they huddled under blankets, sipping whiskey for warmth, the storm transformed the observatory into an island isolated from the world. Perhaps it was this isolation or perhaps the whiskey that finally loosened Archer's guarded nature. "You never asked what happened," he said quietly. "With the company. With me. Zoe studied his profile in the dim emergency lighting. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. 3 years ago, we were testing prototype engines for the first civilian orbital shuttle, he began, his voice distant. My best friend and co-founder Marcus insisted on being the test pilot. He always took the risks while I calculated the odds. Archer's hand tightened around his glass. The engines failed at 80,000 feet, catastrophic malfunction. I watched from mission control as the ship disintegrated. I'm sorry, Zoe said softly. The investigation cleared us of negligence, but the public doesn't distinguish between legal culpability and moral responsibility. The company collapsed. I bought this place to continue the research privately, but you're hiding, Zoe finished for him. His eyes met hers, surprisingly vulnerable. Yes, I understand hiding, she admitted. When the university cut my funding, colleagues I'd worked with for years suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Academic reputation is everything. Once it's gone, you're invisible. The storm raged through the night as they talked, sharing the kind of truths that only emerge in darkness. By morning, when maintenance staff cleared their exit, something fundamental had shifted between them, a tentative trust born of shared vulnerabilities. The discovery, Archer. I need you to look at this. Zoe's excited voice echoed through the dome a month later. She'd been tracking an unusual stellar phenomenon, a binary system exhibiting quantum entanglement patterns that defied standard models. Archer appeared at her side, closer than he would have stood weeks earlier. What am I looking at? These stars are behaving like quantum particles, Zoe explained, gesturing to her data. They're responding to changes in each other's states across vast distances, instantaneously. It shouldn't be possible at an astronomical scale, but the data's clear. Archer studied the readings, his shoulder brushing against hers. This could validate your quantum bridge theory. Exactly. If stars can maintain quantum connections across light years, it suggests the possibility of stable wormholes between distant points in space. Her eyes shone with excitement. It's everything I've been working toward. Over the following days, they worked closely together, Archer applying his quantum computing expertise to analyze Zoe's astronomical data. Their collaboration flowed effortlessly, each anticipating the other's thoughts, building on shared insights until late into the night. When the confirmation algorithms finally validated their findings, they celebrated with champagne under the stars. The telescope dome opened to the clear mountain sky. To quantum entanglement, Archer toasted, his smile transforming his usually serious face. To seeing what others miss, Zoe replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how his eyes reflected starlight. The kiss happened naturally, like gravity drawing two objects inevitably together. Archer's lips were warm against hers, his hand gentle as it cradled her face. For a moment, everything aligned perfectly. Then he pulled away, his expression closing like a shutter. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. Archer, you should document your findings, he said stiffly, already backing toward the door. I'll contact some colleagues who can help with publication. Before Zoe could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone under the vast cosmos that suddenly seemed colder than before. The following morning, Zoe found the observatory unusually quiet. Archer had left a note about business in the city, with no mention of when he'd return or what had happened between them. The choice, Dr. Palmer. It's good to see you again. Professor William Hadley, Zoe's former department chair at Grayson University, looked out of place in the rustic coffee shop at the base of the mountain. His tailored suit and careful smile spoke of academic politics and calculated opportunities. The university has reconsidered your position in light of your recent findings, he continued smoothly. We're prepared to offer you full reinstatement with tenure consideration, plus dedicated research funding. Zoe stirred her coffee, considering the offer she would have desperately wanted 3 months ago. What's the catch, William? No catch. Simply bring your research materials, all of them, back to Grayson for proper documentation and peer review. All of them, Zoe repeated, understanding immediately. Hadley wanted access to the observatory's advanced technology, and potentially evidence of Lyra's existence. Returning to the observatory, Zoe found Archer in the main dome, his back to her as he adjusted the telescope. You're meeting with Hadley, he stated without turning. Not a question. He offered me my position back, Zoe confirmed, watching his shoulders tense. How did you know? Because I'm not a fool. Archer turned, his expression cold. 3 years in isolation teaches you to anticipate betrayal. Betrayal? I haven't agreed to anything. But you're considering it, he challenged. Returning to your real life, your real career. Using what you found here to restore your reputation. That's unfair, Zoe countered, anger rising. You pushed me away. You disappeared after I made a mistake, Archer interrupted. After I allowed myself to forget that getting close to people ends badly. Always. The argument escalated. Years of Archer's isolated pain colliding with Zoe's professional wounds. Until they stood breathing hard, having finally spoken their deepest fears about trust and abandonment. I can't do this again, Archer said finally, his voice quiet. I can't watch someone else leave. You never gave me the chance to stay, Zoe replied softly. You decided for both of us. She packed her research notes that night, carefully omitting anything that might reveal Lyra's existence or the observatory's true capabilities. Before dawn, she was on the bus heading back to the city, unsure if she was making the right choice but certain she couldn't remain where she wasn't trusted. The alignment or understanding of quantum entanglement at cosmic scales fundamentally changes how we conceive of space-time connections, Zoe concluded. Her presentation at the International Astronomy Conference 3 months later. Applause filled the auditorium as she fielded questions, carefully navigating around the specifics of her research location. She had returned to Grayson with edited data, enough to support her findings without compromising the observatory's secrets, but insufficient to secure the promised tenure. Her position remained probationary, her future uncertain. As the audience filed out, a familiar figure remained in the back row. Archer looked different, his beard trimmed, his posture less defensive. But his eyes still held that same intensity as they tracked her across the room. Your presentation was brilliant, he said when she finally approached, though you omitted several key findings. I couldn't reveal everything, Zoe replied. Some secrets aren't mine to share. Something softened in his expression. You protected Lyra, protected the observatory, even after you pushed me away? Yes, she met his gaze steadily. Integrity isn't conditional on being treated well. I was wrong, Archer admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. Fear has been my default setting since the accident. Pushing people away felt safer than risking loss again. They walked together through the conference center, carefully navigating the territory between their professional personas and personal wounds. Lyra made contact, Archer said quietly when they found a private moment. Using principles from your research, she established quantum communication with her homeworld. It works, Zoe. The quantum bridge is real. The implications were staggering, not just for science but for humanity's place in the cosmos. Come back to the observatory, Archer said, his voice holding none of its former command, only honest request, not as caretaker, as partner. In the research and, he hesitated, in whatever else might develop between us. If you're willing to try again. 2 weeks later, Zoe stood in the observatory dome, watching as Lyra demonstrated the quantum communication array they'd built together. On the monitor, symbols from a civilization light years distant scrolled across the screen, proof that distance was merely a physical limitation, not a fundamental one. It's beautiful, she whispered, feeling Archer's presence behind her. Yes, he agreed, his arms encircling her waist as they watched humanity's first contact unfold before them. It is. Outside, stars wheeled across the night sky, following ancient patterns while revealing new secrets. Inside, two people who had each lost their way found alignment with each other, proving that sometimes the most important discoveries happen not through telescopes, but through the courage to see another person clearly, across the vast distances we create within ourselves. Stargazer's Haven, once a sanctuary of isolation, had transformed into a bridge between worlds. And in that transformation, Archer and Zoe found something neither had been looking for but both had needed. A home among the stars, and in each other.